Okay, in our last video we talked about two different types of employees that we run into. One is our tenured employee, the other is a new employee at this point in the year. So if you're getting new employees for the holidays and you're trying to work with new people and you're trying to manage different situations, then one thing you're going to run into is having to communicate to those. We talked a little bit about it in the video yesterday, and I just want to continue to touch on it. This is just going to be a general communication video. I can go into a lot of different things on communication, and there's tons of information on it. It will be a thread that is continued throughout this whole process. Communication is a big part of management, and it's something that you really need to get proficient at in order to be successful. And not just communicating with your team, but and your subordinates, but also with your superiors. So any way that you can develop communication skills is going to be beneficial for you. So wanted to touch on, I put 12 points up, and most of them I tried to relate to new seasonal help. And the reason is, I think that is something that you're going to deal with a lot right now. And you need to be able to communicate with new employees. That's something that, you know, as a manager, as a leader, you need to be able to do that. You need to make sure that your team can do that. So 12 quick points and ways to do that, but as I'm going through, you should be able to relate this to your tenured team as well. It's not just going to apply to new people. First off, be a good listener. Something that I always found, you know, a lot of people struggle with actually listening to feedback from people. They plan on their next sentence, they plan on where the conversation's going, they have something that they're thinking about rather than actually listening to the problem. This is something that I used to struggle with, and I still try to improve on. And most of the communication skills you'll have to continue to work on and continue to try to improve with. But being a good listener is very important. I was talking in the previous video about asking questions to new employees about where they're from, different things like that. You need to listen to that. You need to try to make mental notes about things like that so they know that you care and that you're paying attention, and it's a way that you can relate to them. So a lot of people, when they first meet someone, they introduce themselves, they're so worried about trying to remember the name or introducing themselves, they don't pay attention to the person's name, and they'll forget that. Or, you know, if you're asking where they're from, you're worried about getting on with the conversation or whatever the point was that you were trying to get to, and you might not listen to those facts. You need to listen, you need to pay attention to the conversation so that you connect. And we'll get into that in some other videos and stuff too. So make sure you ask questions. Talked about that the last time. Making sure that you're asking questions, trying to connect, trying to communicate. Number 3 is making sure that your message is understood. And we would talk about this as far as if I am trying to communicate goals to someone or trying to explain to someone, have them state that back to me in a way that communicates that they understood what I'm trying to get them to accomplish. So it was something that, you know, we didn't necessarily do consistently, and we would have problems, and it's like, okay, maybe they didn't understand that. Maybe, you know, had I went through that simple step of just having them reiterate back, yes, this is what you want, this is what you're looking for, and in doing that, it breaks down some of the communication barriers. It makes it a little easier to ensure everyone's on the same page. So you want to make sure that the message is understood. In order to do that, you have to be open and don't be hostile. A lot of times, just the perception, especially if it is some corrective action or you're trying to give input, if it's perceived as anger or perceived as coming from a negative standpoint, a lot of times automatically people will put guard up, and it makes it to where they kind of shut down and they're not taking the feedback. So you got to make sure that it comes from a place of love, a place of understanding, and they understand that you're trying to be beneficial for them and the goals of the company and the organization. If you do that and it's communicated in a good way, then they'll understand that everyone's best interest is involved, and that you're just giving them positive feedback. You should always try to be open. You should always want to communicate, and no matter what you're trying to communicate, you need to do it in a way where people feel comfortable with it. And some of that is going to be based on personalities and learning some different ways to communicate with other people and their personality profiles. Some of that, we talked about the languages of love. We'll get into personality typing, different ways to look at personalities and match. And as a manager, one of the main things is trying to adapt your training, your communication skills to whoever you're talking to. 5, we need communication at every level. So for new people that are coming on board, wherever they might be in the chain of command or in the overall scheme of the organization, we need to make sure that they're getting communication and consistent, clear communication from the person they're working with, from the person above them, and the person below them. If we had someone who was working on our sales floor or on a register, is the communication they're getting from the person training them, the person supervising them, and the management team consistent? And it needs to be consistent, and there needs to be consistent communication at every level in order for that person to be successful. With the new person, a lot of instances you'll have them working with someone who maybe, if it's usually a strong person, it was for us anyway, and they would communicate one goal, they would communicate their way of doing it, which is usually in line with management. But if they work with another tenured team member and the communication isn't consistent, then they start to get different beliefs. And where they're new, it's easy to influence those beliefs and those goals. And if you're not consistent and you don't have that consistent communication at every level, then you can run into problems. Number 6, teaching is communicating. You should always be willing to show people how to do things, to coach, and develop the team. And anytime you're doing that, you're getting feedback, you're giving feedback, and you're building your relationship and your communication skills. At one point, we had a manager who actually stated to me that he was afraid to share with the team some of the knowledge that he knew, some of the skills that he had, because he was afraid that people would try to take his job. That's not a healthy place to be, and as a leader, you don't want to be there. You want to be someone who gives people all the knowledge that you have, has an abundance mentality, and you're trying to share. And in doing so, you're preparing the people who you're training and coaching to take your place one day. And that should be what you're aspiring to do. Everyone should want to be better. Everyone should be looking to improve. And teaching and communicating is one way of doing that. So, by teaching, you're communicating with them. You're showing them information, and it's an open sharing relationship. So it's a big part of the communication. You should look at teaching as a way to communicate. So, and if you can get it to where most of your conversations seem like you're teaching, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to give feedback without it being hostile, without it being misunderstood, but it being something that's a give and take. They're asking questions, you're giving feedback, and they're helping you too. Next, don't condemn, try to understand. It kind of goes to the hostile thing, is, try to understand where the other person's coming from. If they're doing something wrong, why are they doing that? And I used cashier as an example. Sometimes maybe they were trained incorrectly. Maybe the way that it was communicated to them isn't the same as the way that you're seeing it. So you need to try to understand that. And I think it relates a lot to the next one, which is ask why. And when I started getting into sales and different ways to improve sales and drive sales, continue to increase profits and things like that, and the psychology of selling different things, started finding out, ask why, get into why people are doing things. And now I like to consume a lot of information. I get it from a lot of different resources, and one of the podcasts that I have came across was a doctor who was asking, talking about why people do things. And he was actually talking about strength training and observing people who strength train doing certain exercises. And rather than just stating the obvious that they shouldn't be doing that exercise for what they were doing, he was trying to get to the point of why they're doing the thing they're doing. And he gave the example that his brother was staying with him at one point in time, and had left some dishes that he didn't do from the night before. And the doctor was saying that he was mad and upset about it, and his automatic conclusion was that his brother was too lazy and didn't want to take the time and effort to clean the dishes. However, he went on to say, after he thought about it, after he started to question why 3 times, that he tried to put into practice based on the strength training experience, that he found out his brother actually left the dishes because they were sharing a loft apartment, and his brother didn't want to wake him in the middle of the night cleaning. Not that he didn't want to do them, he was just waiting for a more opportune time in order to do that. I think a lot of times we forget that. We don't ask why people may have done something. We automatically jump to the negative conclusion. So in communication, one, you need to ask why. But before you have the conversation sometimes, you need to ask why. Now this will go to our number 12, which is have a plan. And that is, why did the person not do what they were supposed to do? Why did they do the thing that they did? So rather than automatically assume that someone had some malicious intent in leaving a task undone or doing a task incorrectly, maybe we should ask why they did it and try to understand where they're coming from so that we can both grow, develop, and learn. So, once again, asking why is going to help break down that communication barrier. Number 9, manage the message with the audience. So we talked about a new person, asking questions, trying to communicate with them, and trying to find out, a little bit about them. And this is something where we need to structure our conversation around the tasks to where it's going to fit them. Is there certain jargon or a certain wording that you use at your job that you need to make sure that you're communicating clearly with a new person? We used to call our main aisle a racetrack, and if you don't tell people what that is, then a new person doesn't know what you're talking about. But every different profession that you go into is going to have certain jargon and a learning curve just from the communication aspect. If you go into the medical field, there's going to be a ton of different, almost like a new language. If you go into construction, I'm sure you find the same thing. Any field you go into, and even related fields, even if it's management, if you're in retail management, you go into office management, just going into different fields, even different organizations in the same field, you'll still run into things where they have their own language of communicating with each other. So you need to make sure that that message is communicated clearly to the audience. So I always said, make sure if you're teaching new people, start from square one. Start from the beginning. And it's really hard to do that sometimes. Sometimes you think you're starting from the beginning, but you're not. You have to go all the way back. So what's the basic, most simple thing that I need to start with? And let's start there. If they understand those things, then we can start hopping ahead to where we're both on a level field. So if you're really advanced and you've been, you're in management, you know the processes really well, that's fine. But you have to step back to where they're at in order to communicate with them. So it's a lot easier if you just go all the way back to square one and then try to get to where they're at than it is to try to, you know, hit different spots and hope that you end up on a level field. It's easier just to start and then try to catch up with them, because you're already past their learning, the area where they're at in the learning curve. You need to come back and make sure that you're meeting them and then trying to, you know, continue to bring them up. Also, if we're talking about managing the message in the audience, you need to think about the size of the audience and what you're trying to communicate. I would stop our crew frequently and gather and have a meeting if I needed to explain one topic that everyone needed to know, or one thing that was simple enough that I could go over it and everyone would understand. The more complicated you get, the more one-on-one you need to make your message. So a lot of times I looked at it, if it was task focused, if it was a matter of performing an operation over and over again, that was something I could communicate as a group. However, if it's something that is about changing an attitude or changing a personality trait, that's something that I might need to have one-on-one conversations about. And that's something that's going to take a lot more back and forth and a lot more input and a lot more understanding than just giving a general instruction. So general stuff you could do at meetings, you can communicate. But a lot of times the deeper you get, the more individualized it needs to be. Number 10, with communication, you need to prove your credibility. In order to do that, sometimes just being in the position you're in will do that as a manager. But if it's someone new and they've been in your field for a while, you might need to prove your credibility before you can communicate with them and they trust you and feel like they're going to take the feedback that you give. The same with new people though. New people, you know, if it's a new person starting at Christmas or you know, seasonal help, in order for them to take feedback, they still need the trust that you're a credible resource. Just being a manager is probably going to do that, but if you can show that you have the skills that you're trying to give them, then it makes it a lot easier for you to communicate with them. So if you're running a stalking crew, in order to get some of that credibility, they might need to see that you are putting things in place in order to get your goals done. If you're selling from a cashier standpoint, that cashier may need to see that you can sell something before they're going to believe that you're credible and listen to the communication and the feedback that you give them in order for them to be successful. If you're, you know, trying to sell something from the sales floor, interact with a guest, give good experience to your customers, then someone who's out there interacting with customers might need to see you do that before they take that feedback from you. So building credibility is very important in order to communicate and have people take your feedback. 11, don't overload, which hopefully I'm not. I know I went over a lot and we're getting on a little bit, but this is something that people frequently do with new people, is overload them with tons of information. So I always tried to make sure that I was communicating with our new people, that they were getting some feedback and asking to make sure that, you know, they're where they need to be. This goes to the back and forth aspect of it. And if you have like a new supervisor who's in a position, don't assume that they're doing well. Don't assume that they know that everything is going according to plan. You could be overloading them with information. So make sure you're taking them aside at certain points and asking, you know, am I giving you the tools you need to be successful? And a lot of times I would tell people just starting off, hey, I'm going to give you a lot of information. Don't expect you to remember all of it. You know, if you can just remember a part, or just remember that these steps exist, and we'll build from there. So a new person, yes, we're going to show you a bunch of stuff today. It's your first day. You don't need to know all of this. You don't need to remember it, but you need to let some of it sink in. You know, so you need to make sure as a teacher that you're hitting these bullet points are the most important. Now I'm going to show you a bunch. These are the most important. And if you can clarify that they're the most important and make them significant, then hopefully they'll take those ones away. Now they'll probably remember you went over some other stuff, but you got to make sure the key points are the focus. Otherwise, just make sure you're not overloading people. Number 12, last one, have a plan. Anytime that you're going into a conversation that you want to get constructive, that's a constructive conversation in order to build improvement, you need to have a plan going into that. Whether it's a meeting where you're trying to make the team better, whether it's a one-on-one conversation where you're trying to improve someone's personal abilities, any conversation that you're trying to do something significant and something important, you should have a plan going into that. So anytime we went into a meeting, we had already had a discussion before. Anytime that we went in to address someone's performance or get feedback from an individual, we had a plan going into it. Even if it was something task-oriented that I was addressing, I put thought into how I was going to explain it to where the team understood it. So how can I break this down for them? So I always had a plan going into those things. And that's going to be very beneficial. Now, the only time you shouldn't have a plan is if you're just trying to learn about your team, build a relationship, build some rapport. That's fine. Those are just going to be general questions, and you're not going to need to have a plan for that. But if you're actually trying to make something constructive happen, then you most definitely need to have a plan. Put a little quote down here by Emerson: "Every man I meet is my superior in some way." And I think that's an excellent way to look at new employees and people who you're meeting and that's coming into your organization from that standpoint. Anytime that you can look at someone that they're going to bring something to the table somewhere. They might not be a better salesman than you. They might not be a harder worker than you. There's probably a lot of things that you might be better than them at, but there's something that everyone is better than you at. So you need to take that aspect and try to learn what that one thing is. People can teach you lots. Anyone can teach you something. And if you take that aspect and have that mentality, then when you're talking to a new person, you might learn something from them. And if they feel that, then it's going to be a lot easier for them to communicate with you. And you wouldn't believe what you would learn from new employees just because they do something different. They don't have this preconceived notion of how things should run or work, and you observing them can teach you things. And if you approach everything that way, then you'll go a long way as far as building your communication skills and developing your management skills. So, hopefully didn't rattle on too long. You enjoyed the video. Like I said, we're going to talk about some more communication. I'd like to get a series of communication videos in line. I'm just trying to give you some more stuff and help you continue to build. So, thanks.